Hello everybody and welcome back to the channel. In today's video we're going to be painting up this Deathguard Plague Marine. So this model has been base coated in Wraithbone and I'm going to be covering it in contrast skeleton horde. So the skeleton horde goes all over the armor plating to stain it, so you've got that off-white look. I much prefer this to the green look that some people paint their Deathguard. I wanted it to look like the original Deathguard Legion. So once the skeleton horde is dry, we're going to move on to the pauldrons, and these are going to be Plaguebearer flesh. So this is for the green areas on the shoulder. When it first goes on, you'll see that it's rather yellowy and a bit pale. So you've got to reinforce that colour. You need to give it 2 thin coats. You may have heard that advice from some other online painters. The contrast paints work really well, layering them on top of each other to reinforce those colours. Next up we're going to use Griffin Orange. Now this is going to go on all of the what would be brass metal parts of the shoulder plate, but I wanted this to look like it was a really worn, really beaten up brass, so it's rusted over the years and it's just a really dirty browny orange colour. Now once all the metal trims on the collar, the knees and the pauldrons are done, we move on to Nighthaunt Gloom, and this is going to be for the smokestacks. So the smoke's going to get a nice even coat of Nighthaunt Gloom, making sure we get into all the little bits so there's no white showing. We need the whole thing to be blue. Later on we're going to dry brush it up and make it look like smoke and make it look wispy. Next we're going to take Balthazar Gold, and we're going to use this brass colour to cover all of the bells that are hanging on the front and hanging on the back. These aren't going to be covering the weapons. The weapons are going to be a really dark tarnished colour later on. This is just for the bells. Once all the bells are painted in the first layer of brass, we're going to take Ironbreaker and we're going to pick out the little details in the broken wires that are all around the Plague Marine's back and sides. Now all the metallic stages are complete, we're going to move on to using Drakenhof flesh, and that's going to be for the tentacles and the severed head he's got hanging off his belt, the blight grenade. Next up we're going to use Black Templar to paint the handle of the plague knife and the handle of the bolt gun and the exposed piping all around the marine. Once all the black areas are done, it's time to move on to the eyes, and for this we're using Spirit Stone Red. This is another one of those technical paints. I like using this for eyes. It's got that little bit of a glow about it. It's not just a flat red. It's like it's reflective. Tamiya used to do a paint like this called Tamiya gel paints. These are really good for doing eyes and lenses. Now if you can see there, I've got red on the white. So what I'm going to do is I'm coming along with the Wraithbone again, and I'm just going to paint over the red with a little touch of Wraithbone. This is the good thing about using contrasts. Once that's done and it's dry, I'll go over it again with the shade. With the black areas painted, we're now going to move on to using Typhus corrosion, and this is going to be painted onto all of the plague weapons. It's going to do the metallics of the bolt gun, like the barrel, it's going to do the plague knife, and it's going to do all of his spikes. Now at this point you've got all of the base coats down, and if you wanted to you could leave it, do the bases, and you've got a nice neat miniature which is worthy of putting that on the tabletop. But if you wanted to take it to the next stage, we're going to start adding some shades, and we're going to start adding some dry brushing, and we're going to start bringing out all of these details. So next up is Riser Rust, and this is going to be dry brushed onto all of those plague weapons, so the barrel of the bolt gun, the plague sword, anywhere that's got the Typhus corrosion on it. We're going to be using this Riser Rust to make it look like a battle worn old metallics which suits the Deathguard really, really well. The next stage is to use Necron Compound to go over all of those areas we've just covered in the Rise of Rust, and this just gives it an extra layer of detail to the rusty metal. The smoke next, and this is going to get 2 layers. So first one is going to be Celestial Grey, and then once the Celestial Grey coat is done, we're going to be using Balthazar Grey. So a quick dry brush over all of the smoke area, using the lighter shade at the tips and the darker shade at the base. So next we take Basilicanum Grey, and here we're going to start to build up the details on the Plague Marine that Plague Marines are known for. So it's all of the dirt and the grime and the battle-worn damaged areas. We're going to start to make this model go from a basic model to something which really pops on the table and looks great. So once all of that shading has been done, we're going to use Nyloc Oxide. This is a fantastic technical paint. This is going to start. We're going to put this into the cracks and the recesses and the bits between the armor plates to show where all of the corrosion has happened over the years, and these guys don't look after their armor. With this type of paint, or with this technique, is definitely less is more. You don't want to cover the whole thing in the Nyloc Oxide. You want to just pick out little parts where the 2 bits of metal would be joining, little bits of rivets, and you don't want to cover the whole model in this. So now we're going to start to work up all of the grime in the areas of the model. For this I used Vallejo Engine Fuel Stain. I've never used this before, but I got it specifically for these models. When I first tested it out, it didn't work very well. So I added weathering powders from Forge World. This made it much, much darker. So the mix of them together makes a really, really dark, oily stain, which is fantastic. It's exactly what I wanted. I mixed it up in a few different quantities, so I've got some lighter shades and some darker shades, and I spent the next 30 minutes or so going around the model, painting into the recesses, and started working all the strips and the streaks coming down into anywhere I thought that grease, grime, dirt, anything would collect. Plague Marines, they're not clean, they don't polish their armor. And I just wanted to start to build up all the layers of grime initially into all of the recesses, and then you start to work on all of the streaks. So with the first stages I was using the lighter mix that I had, just to get down a bit of a tone, just to get down a layer of it to make the armor look a little bit dirty. In later stages I picked up the darker, as you can see here, the darker stage, the darker mix, and I started to put in the streaks of the rainwater, the dirt, the grease, oil, anything that it is. You start to do all the streaking technique, and this is what Nurgle Marines are known for. And honestly, the whole reason why I did this army is because I wanted to play around with this type of technique. So when I planned out the army, I planned on doing all of the stages up until this point as quickly as possible. That's why I used the contrast paints, because I didn't want to spend ages layering up the white for the armor or layering up the green. That's the boring bit. I wanted to really play around with the weathering techniques and the streaky armor look, or the streaky dirty look. So the whole idea of this army, the whole idea of this paint scheme was the first stages, they're really quick. Gives me the time to play around in the fun stage. And I thoroughly enjoyed painting this model. I'm looking forward to doing the rest of the army this way. I've got some tanks, and I've got Mortarion himself. Now, no Nurgle army is complete if you don't use Nurgle's Rot. So I used this just to pick out little points of interest, any spots, any warts, any things I wanted to highlight on the tentacles. Next up I used Emperor's Children just to add a little bit of interest and a bit of highlights to the tentacles. So the lighter on one end, faded into the darker flesh tone at the other end, so they're not so flat and boring. And finally, I based the model in Vallejo Earth texture. This is very similar to the Games Workshop base paints that they do, or the base-in paints that they do, where it's just basically paint and sand mixed together, but you get to push it around, put it where you want it, leave it for roughly an hour, 40 minutes or so, and it's dry. Much better than using just basic flat sand. So the model was finished off by giving the base a dry brush of Rackard flesh and adding a few puddles of Nurgle's rot. I hope you've enjoyed watching this video. I really enjoyed painting this model. I'm looking forward to doing the rest of my army. As usual, I will try and grab the links for all the materials I've used, and I will drop them in the description below so you can follow along if you want to. If you like what you see, please give this video a like and a thumbs up and subscribe. I will see you guys on the next video.